Hello, my name is Rhys Price-Robertson. Among other things, I'm a Gestalt therapy student in Melbourne, Australia. Just finishing up my training in the next week, actually. So that's a big thing in my life. I want to talk briefly today about anti-realism in Gestalt therapy and why I see that as a problem or a limitation of the Gestalt therapy tradition. What do I mean by realism and what do I mean by anti-realism? Let's start with realism. Very basically, realism is the idea that there is a world that exists independently of our perceptions and understandings, and that there are some things that we can know about this world. Yeah, so I think most people would accept the idea that black holes and carbon in the atmosphere exist separately to our understanding, but I would want to push things a little bit further and say, well, there are also social entities like institutions and social structures that exist independently of our understandings and our perceptions of them. They're not independent of human beings' behaviors or thoughts, but they exist separately to us, and they have their own qualities, their own emergent properties that we could learn things about and that we may misunderstand. We can understand or misunderstand. And anti-realism, on the other hand, is the idea that, well, look, there are different forms of anti-realism. There are some quite extreme forms that would say that there maybe is not a world that exists independently of consciousness, that consciousness exists at the center of all of the universe. But I want to look at more moderate forms, which I think is where Gestalt therapy sits, and we could look at like social constructionism and postmodernism and post-structuralism and hermeneutics as all kind of fitting into this more moderate form. And they say that, well, look, there may well be a world that exists externally to us, but we can't know anything about that world directly. All we can know about and where we should focus our attention is on the meeting point between the human mind or human consciousness and the world. So we could look at like phenomenology as a really good example of this. It doesn't deny that there's a world. You know, there's some fantastic descriptions in the phenomenological literature of the world and of nature. But it says it doesn't treat that external world as a kind of causal reality. It treats it as phenomena that are arising within the perceptions or the consciousness of individuals. And we could look at Gestalt therapy's field theory as well. I know there are contested understandings about field theory, but we could look at field theory as very much along these lines, as looking at the link as well. A lot of people talk about phenomenal fields or talk about the life space, which is taking what could be a kind of ecological theory that looks at us as being in a web of kind of causal relationships, and instead looks at that entire web as it's manifesting through the individual, as it's manifesting in their life space. Now, what's the problem with this? My sense is that we as a culture and as psychotherapeutic communities, we are facing a lot of really difficult issues at the moment. And I'm thinking of things like climate change, I'm thinking of things like post-truth politics, I'm thinking of all the things that we could put under the umbrella of like social justice or diversity or equality. So things like Me Too and Black Lives Matter and trans visibility and so on. And in my view, the best way to deal with all of these issues, or the best way to approach them as communities especially, is to be able to hold two views or two kind of realities simultaneously. On the one hand, we want to acknowledge that there's truth in these ideas like racism and sexism. We want to say they're not just ideas that we're making up. They are like material and causal realities in people's lives. We want to be able to acknowledge that and hold that. We also want to be able to do what Gestalt therapy does so well, and that's acknowledge people's phenomenal experiences and their relationships to the causal reality of these things. My problem with the anti-realism in Gestalt therapy is that it creates this really strong bias against this way of looking at things, and so it becomes passé or seen as naive, or worst of all, kind of Cartesian, to even speak about things as existing independently of our perceptions. I think that a lot of Gestalt therapists do speak in this way, and they do speak in realist ways, but it's a kind of a covert realism. It isn't allowed to properly integrate with the rest of Gestalt therapy's theories and ideas. I'm just finishing up an article that I hope to publish on this topic. If anyone is interested in this and would like to learn more about it, I'm readily findable on the internet, so please get in touch. Thank you.